Rain hammered the Blue Ridge for 2 relentless days, soaking the earth until the slopes trembled and quietly began to split apart. 48 hours had passed since Emily Carter vanished along the wooded trail behind their cabin. Emergency crews had withdrawn at dusk, warning of imminent landslides. The radio on the kitchen counter repeated the same phrase in a flat, mechanical tone. Unstable ground, shifting terrain, do not attempt search until conditions improve. Michael Carter stood alone in the dim cabin, broad shoulders rigid beneath a rain-damp flannel. At 46, he carried the hardened angles of a man shaped by 20 years in law enforcement. Square jaw, faint scar along his left cheekbone from a roadside altercation, dark hair threaded with early gray at the temples. A close-cropped beard framed a mouth more accustomed to issuing commands than pleading for miracles. He had retired from the force after a hostage case ended badly, a single delayed decision costing a civilian her life. Since then, caution had ruled him. Procedure, patience, control. None of those mattered now. Emily, 38, was warmth in motion, tall and lean, chestnut hair usually tied in a loose braid that brushed the middle of her back, clear hazel eyes that seemed to soften whatever room she entered. She had the steady optimism of someone who believed people could be better than their worst days. That belief had steadied Michael through the darker years of his career. The thought of her alone in the collapsing forest hollowed his chest. He gripped her wedding ring, which hung from a thin chain around his neck, pressing the metal into his palm as if pressure could anchor her to him. Logic told him to wait for daylight. Instinct told him every minute erased tracks, washed away scent, buried evidence under mud. A soft, deliberate tapping interrupted the storm's roar. Michael turned toward the window. On the porch stood a gray and white German shepherd, no more than a year old, lean but powerfully built, rain flattening its thick coat against a narrow, intelligent face. Its amber eyes locked onto his with unsettling steadiness. The dog lifted one paw and tapped the glass again, then turned its head toward the black tree line writhing in wind. It did not bark. It waited. Michael's pulse shifted from despair to focus. Mountains could collapse, trails could vanish, but a lead was a lead, and he had just been given one. Michael did not waste another second. He pulled on his weatherproof jacket, checked the batteries in his high-lumen flashlight, and stepped into the storm. The dog waited at the edge of the porch, muscles coiled beneath its rain-darkened coat. Up close, the animal appeared about 10 months old, long-legged, lean, not yet fully filled out, with a narrow muzzle and sharp amber eyes that missed nothing. There was no collar, no tag, but its posture held discipline rather than panic. "Ranger," Michael muttered, the name forming without thought. The dog flicked an ear, as if accepting it. They descended the first slope behind the cabin, where the ground had turned to thick slurry. Each step sank inches into mud that sucked at Michael's boots. He adjusted his weight instinctively, years of patrol training guiding his balance over unstable surfaces. The storm muted distant sounds, but beneath the rain he heard something deeper. An irregular rumble rolling through the earth. Not thunder. Movement. Ranger moved ahead in a deliberate zigzag, nose nearly brushing the soaked leaves. Rain-diluted scent trails by the minute, yet the dog pressed on with unwavering focus. When Michael slowed to navigate a fallen branch half buried in muck, Ranger paused, turned, and locked eyes with him, ensuring he followed. There was intelligence in that gaze, not wild fear, but intention. They reached a narrow ravine where a seasonal stream had swollen into a churning ribbon of brown water. The banks were eroding visibly, clumps of soil collapsing into the current. Michael scanned upstream, calculating risk the way he once assessed volatile suspects. No safe crossing point. He tested a partially submerged log with his boot. It shifted but held. Ranger crossed first in a fluid leap, landing sure-footed despite the slick bark. Michael followed, heart hammering as water splashed up to his knees. Midway across, a sharp crack echoed overhead. A rock the size of a basketball tumbled down the opposite slope, missing him by yards before plunging into the torrent. On the far side, Ranger did not hesitate. The dog angled toward a steeper incline where tree roots clawed from exposed soil like skeletal fingers. As Michael climbed, the hillside shuddered again. Fine debris cascaded around him, peppering his shoulders. He flattened himself against a trunk, breath controlled, mind narrowing into survival mode. This was not a suspect to outmaneuver. It was gravity itself. Ranger stopped near the top of the incline, ears pricked, body low. The dog emitted a short, urgent whine, its first sound. Michael crested the ridge just in time to see a section of hillside 50 yards to the east shear away. Earth and shattered branches thundered downward in a violent wave, obliterating part of the trail he might have taken. The message was clear. The mountain was choosing the pace. Ranger turned west instead, selecting a narrower path skirting the unstable zone. Michael followed, pulse steadying into grim resolve. The landslide had erased the obvious route. If Emily had passed through here before the collapse, every second mattered now. No time to hesitate, only forward. The ruined sawmill emerged through sheets of rain like a skeleton half swallowed by the mountain, its collapsed beams jutting at crooked angles against the gray sky. Michael slowed as he and Ranger approached the clearing. The air smelled of splintered pine and freshly torn earth. The structure had been abandoned for decades. Warped planks sagged inward, rusted bolts protruding like broken teeth. Before he could scan the perimeter, a thunderous crack split the air behind the mill. A section of hillside sheared away in a violent cascade, mud and branches crashing down where solid ground had stood seconds earlier. The impact sent a tremor under Michael's boots. Ranger flinched but did not retreat. The young German shepherd's coat clung tight to its athletic frame, ribs faintly visible beneath wet fur, powerful hind legs braced against the sliding soil. Its ears stayed erect despite the chaos, amber eyes cutting through rain toward the debris field as if filtering signal from noise. The dog circled left, avoiding the unstable zone, and Michael followed, angling his flashlight beam low to catch disturbance patterns in the mud. Near a collapsed timber wall, something bright snagged against a thorny blackberry bush. Michael crouched, a strip of deep red fabric twisted among the barbs. He recognized it instantly. The lightweight scarf Emily favored on hikes, more for habit than warmth. The sight tightened his throat. He forced himself into methodical thinking, fabric caught while moving quickly, direction of pull toward the south slope, no blood visible. Another tremor rolled through the clearing. Ranger's head snapped toward a narrow descent beyond the mill, a chute of slick clay and exposed roots leading into a tight ravine. The dog advanced without hesitation. Michael hesitated only long enough to mark the scarf's position in memory. If this slope gave way, the evidence would vanish. Halfway down, the ground shifted beneath them. Fine gravel slid past Michael's boots. He dug his heels into a root to anchor himself. Ranger moved with uncanny balance, spreading its weight low, claws biting into softened earth. At the bottom of the ravine, the air felt heavier, sound compressed by steep walls of limestone streaked with fresh mud. Then the mountain roared. A massive section of hillside behind them collapsed in a deafening surge. Michael spun just in time to see the path they had descended swallowed by a wall of churning soil and shattered branches. Within seconds, the slope transformed into an impassable mound of steaming debris. The route back to the cabin? Gone. Silence followed, broken only by rain striking newly exposed rock. Michael turned slowly, assessing options with the clarity that used to surface at crime scenes when exits closed and variables narrowed. There would be no retreat, no regrouping. The ravine curved deeper westward, partially shielded from further slides by a natural overhang. Ranger stood ahead, chest rising fast but posture firm, eyes fixed on the darker bend of the ravine as if certain the answer lay beyond it. The dog did not look back this time. Michael tightened his grip on the flashlight. Every instinct warned of escalating danger, yet the scarf proved Emily had come this way. If the landslide had buried the only escape behind them, then whatever remained ahead was their single remaining chance. Only one direction remained. Forward. The ravine narrowed into a funnel of slick stone and dripping earth, the air colder beneath a jutting limestone overhang that formed a shallow natural shelter. Ranger surged ahead and began scraping at the soaked leaves gathered near the rock wall, not frantically but with focused urgency, as if uncovering something he already knew was there. Michael steadied his flashlight and swept the beam into the hollow. Emily lay curled inside the narrow recess, her tall frame compressed against the stone. Mud streaked her once light hiking jacket, now darkened and heavy with rain. Her chestnut hair, usually braided neatly down her back, hung loose and tangled against pale skin drained of warmth. Even exhausted, her features retained their quiet strength, high cheekbones, steady hazel eyes that now fluttered open against the glare. Her right ankle was visibly swollen, boot twisted at an unnatural angle. She had likely slipped when the hillside first shifted, sliding into the crevice seconds before the slope collapsed above it. Fresh smears of clay streaked the rock just inches over her head. Another minute, and the cavity might have sealed. "Michael?" Her voice was hoarse, fragile, but conscious. Relief flickered across her face, followed quickly by pain. Michael dropped to his knees beside her, movements controlled despite the surge of emotion tightening his throat. His hands, large and steady from years of field work, assessed her condition with practiced efficiency. Pulse present, breathing shallow but regular, pupils responsive. He had once trained younger officers to compartmentalize panic. Now he forced that discipline on himself. "You're okay," he said, though he knew the terrain disagreed. Emily tried to shift, suppressing a cry as pressure touched her ankle. She had always been resilient, the kind of woman who met setbacks with quiet resolve rather than complaint. That resilience had drawn him to her years ago, balancing his instinct for caution with her belief that fear should not dictate life. Now that same trait had likely pushed her deeper into the woods before the storm intensified. Another low rumble vibrated through the ravine. Small stones trickled from the slope above, tapping against the limestone like warning knuckles. Ranger moved instantly, positioning himself at the mouth of the shelter. The young German shepherd's body formed a barrier between them and the unstable incline. His soaked coat clung to defined shoulders, muscles tightened beneath the fur. Ears forward, eyes fixed upward, he emitted a low growl, not aggression, but alert. Michael removed his jacket and wrapped it around Emily's shoulders, adding insulation against the biting chill. Hypothermia would not wait for daylight. He scanned the ravine's curvature. The overhang provided partial protection, but the narrow floor could become a chute if another slide triggered. Staying was as dangerous as moving. He met Emily's gaze. Despite pain, her expression steadied. She understood without explanation. They had faced crisis before, different kind, different terrain, but the unspoken communication remained. Michael slid one arm carefully around her back, preparing to lift. Ranger shifted his stance, ready to move. The mountain groaned again. There would be no second chance to hesitate. Michael slid his arm firmly around Emily's back and lifted her with controlled precision, careful not to jar her injured ankle. She winced, but did not cry out, jaw tightening in the determined way he knew so well. Even soaked and pale, she carried that same quiet endurance that had defined her through every hardship. Steady eyes, measured breathing, refusing to surrender to panic. He adjusted her weight against his chest, bracing himself for the climb. There was no route back. The ravine behind them was now sealed by fresh debris. The only option lay west, along a slanted ridge partially shielded by rock formations that appeared more stable than the exposed chute they had descended. Rain softened to a heavy drizzle, but the ground remained treacherous. Each step required calculation. Michael tested every foothold before shifting Emily's weight forward. Years of police work had trained him to read unstable environments, collapsed buildings, volatile scenes, but this was different. The enemy was terrain, unpredictable and patient. A small slide broke loose behind them, soil cascading into the hollow where Emily had sheltered moments earlier. Within seconds, the limestone recess vanished under mud. Michael felt a cold surge at the realization. Had Ranger arrived even 5 minutes later, there would have been nothing left to find. Ranger moved ahead along the western incline, choosing firmer ground instinctively. The young German shepherd's gait remained steady despite exhaustion. Mud streaked his legs. Burrs clung to his damp coat. At less than a year old, he should have lacked the endurance for this kind of ordeal, yet something in his focus kept him driving forward. Every few yards he stopped, turning back, ears upright and eyes sharp, ensuring they followed the safest line. He seemed to sense subtle shifts before they became visible, pausing when gravel loosened, rerouting around patches where the soil shimmered with instability. Halfway up the ridge, the slope shuddered again. Michael dropped to one knee, shielding Emily as loose stones skipped past them. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, but his breathing remained disciplined. He rose carefully, adjusting course behind Ranger's chosen path. The incline gradually leveled, tree density increasing where root systems reinforced the soil. The threat did not disappear, but its intensity lessened. By the time they reached the outer tree line overlooking the lower valley, the rain had tapered to mist. The cabin lay beyond the clearing, distant but visible through thinning fog. Michael felt tension ease fractionally, though he did not slow until solid ground replaced the shifting hillside. Days later, sunlight revealed the mountain's aftermath. Entire sections of the ravine had collapsed into a scar of raw earth. The limestone hollow where Emily had survived was indistinguishable from the surrounding debris. The trail they once walked had been erased completely. Inside the cabin, Emily rested on the sofa, her ankle stabilized and wrapped. Color slowly returned to her skin. Ranger lay pressed against the cushions beside her, head resting near her hand, eyes half closed but alert to any movement. Michael stood on the porch, watching mist rise from the wounded slopes. Throughout his career, he had faced men driven by greed or rage, threats with motives and patterns. That night, there had been no motive, only gravity and time. And the reason his family still stood beneath this sky was not training nor instinct honed by years on patrol. It was a young dog who refused to turn back when the mountain began to fall. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or parted skies. Sometimes they come quietly, on 4 steady paws, through rain and falling earth. On the night the mountain began to collapse, Michael believed he was racing against gravity and time, but in truth he was being guided. In the darkest hour, when search teams had withdrawn, when logic offered no solution, when the earth itself seemed to turn against him, help still found its way to his door. Perhaps that is how grace works. Not always loud, not always obvious, but present. Emily survived not because the storm was gentle, but because something greater than fear refused to let love be buried. A young dog appeared at the window at the exact moment hope was thinning. A path opened before it closed, a shelter held just long enough. Coincidence, some might say, or maybe a reminder that even in chaos, God still moves in ways we cannot predict. In our daily lives, we face mountains of our own, loss, uncertainty, illness, quiet battles no one else sees. There are moments when the ground feels unstable beneath us, when we wonder if anyone hears our prayers. This story is a reminder. You are not alone in the storm. Guidance can come through unexpected hands, unexpected paths, unexpected courage. Faith does not always remove the mountain. Sometimes it sends someone or something to lead us safely through it. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us about a time when help arrived just when you needed it most. Your testimony could strengthen someone else's faith. And if you believe in stories that remind us of loyalty, love, and quiet miracles, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next journey. May God watch over you and your family. May He guide your steps when the path feels uncertain, protect you when the ground trembles, and send you signs of hope when you need them most.